someone could be so down, but you observe that and you're like, yeah, he's just down because he's in this unlucky sequence.
Yeah.
But if he continues to do this, he will always end up like up in the end and then pay everyone back. And that happened so many times that from all the legitimate names in it, because there were people that scammed, of course, but all the legitimate names, like myself included, whenever I took out a loan from someone, you just paid it back. And the big reason is just because you didn't hold the gold in RuneScape. So a lot of times you cashed it out for real life money.
Okay.
And then just because the game would ban you and stuff, so you didn't want to like kind of get banned with the money and it's just gone, right? So people kept a finite amount of risk, so to speak, and then that's X amount of thousands of dollars, and then you would see it. But I guess when you live it for years, when eventually I got into trading, I was like, I understand probabilities through and through, even as a life perspective of you can look at something, and I guess I realized that eventually was people can, if I tell you, for example, I don't know, like you have an 80% chance of whatever happening here, you will believe that 80% with 100% of your belief. But the 20%, you won't give it that equal 100% belief. And then so when it does, that 20% happens, you almost feel betrayed. And then that betrayal is like targeted to you, right? Because it's you're the one getting like fucked over in a way. And it was that same logic where I was like, for myself, I guess at the start, I was like, balance of probability, my TA is bad, you know? And I knew how to accept that already because I guess I had a bit of a balanced perspective, and no offense to a lot of people, but I came into trading and I was like, and I gave myself 5 years to succeed. Whereas I see like having coached a lot of students now and in and outside of Falcon, people do come in with this like 6 month to a year timeline. Whereas I well and truly, like I remember at the time, and funny enough, bringing it back to the IP side of things, why I also thought it was a scam was it was only $300. I looked at like Ivy League schools in the United States, for instance.
Of course, yeah.
I was like, okay, if you want to become a top lawyer in the world and you go to Harvard and you pay, I don't know how much Harvard is, like $250,000 or $500,000 or whatever. I was like, if you can make the same amount of money, if not more in trading, you're really going to pay $300 in 6 months? I was like, no, that makes no sense. I did believe that you could make it. I knew there was like the math was there, the liquidity was there. I just never believed the whole, I can do this in 6 months if I work really hard. I was like, that makes no sense. There are people that do this all day, every day for decades. There's computers like JP Morgan and all these things. And it's like, it will take a bit more time. So I think that mentality kept me grounded in a way. And then having had the years of psychology already, it kind of made it like, okay, I just have to get my TA to a level where I'm like, if I know I'm doing this part right, then it's probabilities.
So essentially for you, it was like you already had built the hardest part, the hardest element of trading already. You'd built that strong foundation on that side. So essentially it was like, yeah, most people is the opposite way around. Technical analysis.
You can pick it up relatively quickly.
Yeah. But most people aren't going to find themselves in that situation more than likely, unless, as you say, said off camera, like how many people find themselves working behind the scenes in a casino, for example. You might work in a casino, for example,
but you're not like dealing the odds, not your money.
You might just be dealing the cards.
Yeah, exactly. So you're kind of like almost zoned out in a way because it's just a script you're kind of running, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, in terms of just quickly on the RuneScape side of things, you mentioned about people, you know, you would trust that they would follow their edge and they'll be able to pay you back. Did you ever have people who kind of went on tilt, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. It just, you do see the tilt. It was, you kind of heard it more because again, being mechanical, you can't mess it up. Right, so they can't take a bad trade, so to speak. The only thing that was left from a volume-based perspective is the risk parameter, meaning how much you risk.
Okay.
And again, that was the side of if I could go back and control things, I would say yes, guys. Like call it like a portfolio diversification. I would say no, we would never take a trade bigger than this amount. You'd have to do this. Like that's the side that I've learned more from trading that I would like retroactively apply back.
Okay, yeah.
The tilt side of things, I think, was just hilarious. I think it made us all extremely negative. Yes, because you're just hearing like every curse word under the sun. You're hearing all of it, right? And in a way, a lot of people didn't really. Like, I don't know if the term ASR is like a trading-wide community, but it's just being like reviewing your trades and seeing what you could have done better, right? And in a way, funny enough, which I'll just connect this in a second.
Just so you say advanced self-review, right?
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't sure if it was like one of those, like everyone knows that.
Just in case anyone out there doesn't know.
I remember I had this friend, Josh, who played League of Legends, and he was actually one of the best in the world. And I remember it was kind of like learning about forecasting very first time. We were playing a game, and he was a lot better than me, so it was like helping me like level up. And then he basically called the next like minute and a half of events of all time. He's like, hey, I'm going to come here. This is going to happen. This guy's going to come here. And he called it all almost perfectly, right? He ends up getting a pentakill, which is basically kind of the best thing that could happen. And his response to it was, fuck, I could have done better. And I remember in that moment, I was like, yeah, let's go. You know, I was hyped. And his response was like so negative. And that was like probably the very first time where I realized this person really cares about his craft, so to speak, through and through. That even though we objectively got the best case scenario, he realized he didn't do everything right that he could have, that he kind of left edge on the table, so to speak. So I would say that was my very first glimpse of ASR in that way. And then in connecting with the RuneScapes, I've seen people's tilt in their psychology. I would say for myself, where I kind of became very good is I could start to ASR everyone. You know, where I kind of looked at the world in the sense of, I was like, okay, what can I bet on for most people? I was like, I think most people want to be happy. I think most people want to have money, and I think most people want to fall in love. So I was like, all right, if we look at those three scenarios and kind of follow the psychology backwards, why would someone, I don't know, abuse his wife, for instance? Or why would someone do something extremely tilt-like that goes counterintuitive to who they are? I was like, I don't think someone woke up one day and was like, hey, I'd like to lose all our money today and start over, right? Like, I don't think that was the logical thought process. So at some point, their psychology kind of gave in, right? And I became so fascinated by that. And I was like, okay, if I can kind of look at the mistakes other people make, I could minimize my mistakes. And then I kind of looked at that, and that's why I've always, and like people within Falcon know this, I have a huge fascination with data. Like I'm the data guy. I'm always looking at it because to me, it's a cheat code. Look at what everyone else is doing. If you look at the average stat, so to speak, that's the likely situation, including to yourself and myself, obviously, to happen. So instead of being like incredibly egotistical about it and saying, oh, that won't happen to me, how about assume it will and then see what you can mitigate against that? And that kind of became the thought process from that point of view. And as I said, having seen that over the years in so many ways where psychology was very intertwined with what we did, meaning when you're playing a game like that where it's very like combat related, it's on the spot, instantaneous, yeah, you get tilted. It's like FIFA, you know what I mean? Like I'm sure you've seen that graph on FIFA where it's like when someone scores a goal against you. Have you seen it? Do you know what I'm talking about? It's basically like it's fucking bullshit, and then the other, like the small part of the pie graph, it's also bullshit. Like it's never your fault. Oh, right? It's basically what it shows. Yeah. Right, but it's kind of rooting it back in psychology, right? I mean, I'm sure at the time when I joined trading, they're like, hey, 90% of people fail in this. And immediately I was like, shit, like if 90% of people fail in this, like why am I going to succeed?
Yeah.
And I guess like all those to connect those points was the retroactive thought process of kind of really analyzing that.
Yeah, 100%. Well, it already sounds very, very in depth. And the thing I love about when we talk about the journey is the overlapping features. Obviously, some things don't have as many, but I find that in terms of trying to be successful at something, regardless of what it is, there's always very, very similar traits. I think with trading, obviously, in terms of psychology, it's a bit different. You know, you have to think in a very particular kind of way. But in terms of like, work ethic, data, I think is still very beneficial regardless of what you do. In terms of data, though, did the data collection or fascination begin? Did it begin when you mentioned about the League of Legends side of things, or was it trading, or was it even back in the RuneScape? When you said about the...
I would say on the RuneScape side, because we have to actually understand the odds of our games, right? So that was the side of like, hey, how am I going to win this? How should I? Because even though I didn't like do 1% risk at the time, because it just made no sense with what was happening, there was a side of like, I was always kind of wondering the question is, how long can I stay in without losing my money in the game, which I guess in the modern day perspective would be losing your account, so to speak, right? And you're playing those numbers of making sure you always have enough capital, because as soon as you lose the money, you're out, right? You just can't make it anymore. It was the same perspective. So looking at it from the point of view in the different games we had like, I think at some point, maybe 8 different games, variations.
Yeah.
And it was like 3 that were a lot better than the other ones, right? So even that in itself, you'd realize you'd want to stick to more of that one in certain games. And so I guess that kind of stayed with me. And then even then, like funny enough, and my engineering friends know this, when I was in engineering, I realized, and this is a bit of like call it a bet in a trade, is that a lot of the professors were repeating their exams. Like I would look at past exams and I realized, wait, this guy's been teaching for 35 years. He's very habitual in that way. What are the chances he's going to change his exam that he's done many times over? Yeah. Right? And then all of a sudden I realized, I was like, look, you have the previous exams are within varying degrees of one another.
Oh, cool.
And then so I stopped going to classes altogether. I stopped studying altogether, and I only studied past exams. And it was a side, and I was like, yeah, exactly. I was like, look, I'm betting. I was like, I'm not playing the material, I'm playing the person. I was like, I think my teacher has been doing the exact same thing for the last 25 years. Why is he going to wake up today and say, you know what, I'm going to completely change everything I've done?
Because of you.
Yeah, exactly, right? and then so I took that, and I think we had total like 35-ish engineering courses, give or take. I think 28 of them exams were like repeated, almost identical. So then
and the remaining probably very small.
Exactly. They were like, I think there was only one that I was like, man, this was hard, like very different. And I walked in with like a C in that one, because as you're studying for the exam, if you actually learn it, you'll still know what to do.
Of course, yeah.
But you're not just memorizing an answer. It's essentially you have to break it down, right? So you still have to objectively know what's happening. But my point is I placed that bet, so to speak, playing the person, and that extra 4 months of semester now, I got to put that into trading. Right, that was the side, because I saw a lot, like for myself, I had my grandfather take care of, I had my engineering, I had my business on the games at the time, and I was trying to pick up trading. It was not sustainable, it was not possible. Like if you're trying to do everything.
How did you manage that then? Because I know a lot of people struggle obviously with just say full-time work and trading, or studying and trading. So like 2 things. You obviously had 4 things there. How did you handle that? Obviously, that was one thing.
Yeah, so it was interesting because I would say at first I sacrificed sleep and it was not healthy. And I remember at the time being like super preachy, but I was like, everyone can sleep 4 hours a day. It caught up to me eventually. But it was also priority, as I said, meaning like with the engineering side, I realized I had this block every single day that if instead of dedicated to engineering, I could put it to the trading side of things, right? Now, internally, was that fine? There was a part of me, it's like, I don't like starting something and not completing it, like as weird as it was. And I didn't drop out because I come from a traditional family, so there's no dropping out. Like that's just not even part of the conversation. And also I give it to my mom. Like she's the one who always kind of instilled it to me. She was like, when you start something, you finish it. So that was there in that point of view. But I then prioritized like the trading side of things. And despite, I guess in the back of my mind, I was like, yeah, but you're probably going to fail engineering. And there was a part of me that kind of made it all in though, because when I looked at my peers that were passionate about engineering, I was like, I'm going to lose against you. Like if we both apply to the same job, why would they pick me? I don't do any of I forgot what it's called, but like internships. I was like, I didn't do any of the internships. I didn't do all these things to like buff up your resume.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, I had an online business on RuneScape, an online business on League of Legends. I'm doing this trading thing, which again, to most society is taboo, so to speak, unorthodox. I was like, I'm actually so all in on this that if I actually decided to eventually kind of go down the traditional route, I'm easily a decade behind everyone else from just a part-time job perspective, the work experience to all those things, right? So it made it be a bit more all in. And then from the grandfather side of things, just because I was his primary caretaker, I would say it helped me psychologically. And I remember because at the time he had Parkinson's, and then so he needed to take a certain pill like every 8 hours or whatever. So, and one of them aligned with 3 a.m. and then which was actually beneficial to me because for London session in Montreal, right? So I had to get up at the time I was getting up at 2:50 every day to give him his pill, which actually worked out well because when you're kind of left to yourself, you can easily go back to bed at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, right? Whereas when you have to like get up to give someone a pill, you're up now and you're like, all right, I might as well check the charts and you do all these other things. But I remember this one particular time I took a trade and then he needed to be like showered and stuff. So I took the trade and then I went to I showered him and changed the sheets. I did everything I needed to. And that took about an hour and a half from start to end because it takes a bit of time when you're doing it with someone, right? And I came back and the trade was a loss. And I was so mad. I was like fuming, right? And I had known this for a while, but I didn't want to admit it to myself. And I asked myself, funny enough, I kind of almost in a way stepped out of my body and looked at me and I was like, why are you mad? And I was like, because the trade should win. And I was like, yeah, why? And I was like, and the answer, almost as soon as it came out, I was like, because I take care of my grandfather. And I was like, the market doesn't give a fuck. I was like, your trading's garbage, right? And it was a part of, I was doing too much. I was doing all these other things. And it's almost like I wanted the market to reward me for being a good person, so to speak. And in a way, I realized I was like, the market does not care if you're evil, if you're good, whatever you do. It's the whole the sun shines on everyone kind of logic, right? And that was a deeper perspective of, and I teach it to my students where I don't want to come off as cold, but I'm like, your situation's your situation and it's your cards, right? And for my grandfather time I was like, I have engineering, I can't get rid of that. I have my grandfather, can't get rid of that. I was like, what's left is sleep, social life, and then maybe quit the video games or whatever, which my business was on it. So it was like, it's a hard one there. And I was like, well, okay, I only have this amount of time left now. Part of me was like, and it sucks to say to voice it like this, but part of me was like, you know what, my grandfather won't always be around. This won't always be, engineering finishes at some point. I was like, okay, for the time being, I may have only 2 hours a day, for instance. I got to make sure now I'm hyper intentional with that 2 hours. And it's like, what am I trying to get out of this session? And that's where I kind of realized for a lot of people is they kind of do trading work for the sake of doing trading work. Rather than like you would never go to the gym and then use whatever machine is just available. You actually know days in advance what it is you're going to do, what reps, what count, and all of that before you get to the gym. Versus you don't get there and you're like, oh, the bench press is free. I guess I'll do bench press, right? But people approach trading like that. They're like, just show up. And it's like, to a degree, sure. But if you're trying to be efficient, if you're trying to
actually make results.
You got to know there has to be a fundamental purpose to everything you do. So that was kind of that. And then after you do it, and as things started to free up, I guess at some point, then you're able to go all
like a process.
Yeah, and as I said, for myself, I kind of aimed to go full time about the time I would graduate engineering. That was kind of the goal. And because I was like, I don't want to work. I was like, I've done so many entrepreneurial based stuff. I don't call it that just because I didn't intentionally I'm gonna be an entrepreneur. It was just I just found myself there. I was like, oh, cool, we're doing this, right? And as I got into that kind of transition, put more and more time into it.
100%. No, 100%. I think a lot of people can learn. I think the major thing that you said there was definitely being intentional. As you say, so many, if not majority of people, unfortunately, they just turn up, they do it for the sake of doing, and there's no intention. And I think the great analogy you used there in terms of the gym, because it's perfect. You don't just turn up and, okay, today I'll do this, today I'll do that. while breaking into steps and having your plan in place. Most of all, knowing, okay, I have this amount of time, right? This amount of time, so I need to use that time. Wow, there's a lot that you said there.
Yeah.
Touch on, right? And I'll focus on this point first because this is kind of related to exact topic we were talking about, which is, do you, based on how many people you've taught and everything as well, how many people waste time, right? They say they don't have a lot of time, but when you talk to them and you probably realize and dissect it to them, they have loads of time. They just waste it.
I would say quite a bit, and it's also maybe not even just waste of time, but there's no purpose to their time in a way, right? And they're almost not reverse engineering what it is they're trying to get out of something. And in a way, I would say that was like the huge part for me, is I was always in that reverse engineering mindset and coming down to the stats, right? So I'll look at anything and I'll be like, why is this the way that it is? Like, how does this objectively happen? And in myself, like, as I said, I was taking care of my grandfather, and that to me was a priority, which nothing wrong with that. But I can't expect my trading to get better because I'm taking care of my grandfather. But in a way, I did psychologically feel betrayed. And funny enough, I guess digging into trading psychology from people and like just talking to students, so I realized I was like, trading doesn't create psychological problems, but it does expose them. And that was the side where you can kind of see where it is coming from for a lot of people, how they kind of came to be. So for myself, in realizing I have this limited time a day, because you hear the word balance all the time, and like, how can I balance my day? And then sometimes I'll kind of play stupid with this. I was like, what does that mean, balance? And they're like, you know what balance means? I was like, no, I understand the physical definition.
Yeah.
But what does balance actually mean? And then they're like, well, I want to do this part of my day and do that part. I was like, okay, you want this almost arguably picture perfect day where you can kind of spend a bit of time on everything. And that kind of brings it back to the perspective of like, when I was saying comparing it to sport, in the sense of, are you good enough to actually like do this? And everyone else who's doing it all day, every day, what gives you that edge from that point of view?
Yeah.
So I guess in that way, when looking at it, is looking at the time, looking at the perspective of how people use things, and looking at the intentionality behind it, you can change priorities along the way. And I think that kind of became the important part to me, is realizing, okay, for a while it was my grandfather, for a while it was my business. Like, as soon as the business side ended, I loved video games. I still want to play video games, but I realized it was either video games or it was learning to trade.
Yeah.
So I was like, I dropped the video games. And no, it was not easy right away. There was that side every day where you do 4 hours of trading work and you're like, great, I can now play this. And I did for a bit, until eventually I was like, it's not going to make me who I want to be, and then over time I ended up like, I would have like, okay, you can play once a week or whatever, until eventually I kind of realized, I remember this one particular day I played all day and I actually won most of the games that day. And I remember at the end of the day, I kind of felt, I don't want to use the word depressed, but I just felt like very sad and whatever. And I was like, why? But you won, right? And there was a side of me that I just looked at it, I was like, because I'm not growing anymore. Like, I got so addicted to the side of scale and, becoming better at something versus this, I realized was like, it was just obsolete and finite.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, we got to stop this. And then as a perspective, I guess, even in my own life, at some point, I started to look at everything of what can I do every day to get better? So connecting it to the trading side, and when I like started to go to the gym more seriously, I remember at the time I'll take a trading loss and then I would do nothing else that day because trading was the most important thing, right? So I was like, who cares about everything else?
Yeah.
So what would happen is, at the time, let's just say, I don't know, I had content to watch that week, and I'd say, okay, we're going to watch 2 hours of content every day for whatever. You can kind of cheat that, because you can come Saturday and the days you missed, you kind of stack it and then watch 6 or 7 hours on Saturdays to make up the difference.
Yeah.
Right? But what happened at the gym is, at some point, because I guess a series of losses and whatever, I didn't go to gym for like 3 weeks. And then when I went back, I was like trying to think to myself, how can I cheat this? Like, how can I make up that lost time? And I was like, oh wait, I can't do 500 like bench presses today.
Yeah.
And it kind of dawned on me. I was like, wait, that time is now gone and there's nothing I can do about it. Like, I can't make up for those like gym gains in a way, right? Yeah. And I was like, shit. And I was like, I took a bad day and my actions made it worse. So my thought process then slipped. I was like, okay, on a bad day, if I can control the bleeding, if I can like minimize the damage, in a way that compounds in itself, because instead of losing like this much, you're now losing this much. And over time, you realize how much that actually happens. And you see this with stats where people learn to walk away from certain losses, for instance. And I'm not saying that's the smartest thing mathematically to do, but psychologically, maybe it is. I remember for myself, at least, if I took a -1, I'd stop for the day. In a way that actually protected me, because I ended up not like blowing funded accounts, because you'd hear people like, I started bad and then by then they lost the account. That is like complete out of my reality, because I had that damage control kind of limited. Now, do I agree with that in hindsight? Again, from a mathematical point of view, no, that's not how you play an edge. But psychologically speaking, it allowed me live to fight another day, so to speak, which allowed more experience, allowed that refresher mindset where you kind of come back, you're like, okay, new day, let's do it, right? Yeah. And it compounded.
Versus obviously if you were to like say, just keep taking it and let's say it was a losing streak, but you're in this process where you're learning, you just have this very negative and almost traumatic experience.
Exactly.
Where instead of coming back the next day, you're coming back next month, 3 months time.
Well, I mean, if you look at it even just as a value, I don't think the average person can well and truly like often afford like a 100K assessment, right? Like that's, I don't know, like most like 1.2K, give or take.
Yeah.
That's not an easy sum of money to just drop for most people, statistically speaking, right? So if you feel that that's a large sum of money, or that's like maybe a month or two of saving money on the side, every trade you're taking is like part of your soul is in that.
Yeah.
You know, you're not just like, oh, okay, we try again. So part of it now, you lose 2 or 3 and already you're kind of seeing the end in that way. That tilt is coming in, you know, it blinds you, and then it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy in that way.
Yeah, no, very, very true. And in terms of, again, we're kind of like reverting back a bit to those broad topics that we covered. One of them was like, in terms of the business, the gaming business, how much did you make from them?
Let me just stop you for a moment there, guys, because I want to tell you about our other sponsor, and I have partnered with, and I'm very excited to tell you about this one, TradeZella. Now, as someone who's a trader and myself, I learned how...
What about passion? Right, because you're passionate about these things too.
Yeah.
So would you say that that was an element to it as well?
I don't know if I was passionate before it. I definitely am, like, through it. Like, I've enjoyed that constant puzzle on edge, and I think there obviously is an adrenaline rush in, like gambling is addictive inherently. There's an obvious reason. There's higher highs and there's lower lows, I guess, right? And it was that same perspective of there's something so nice about understanding a system ahead of time and knowing if you do this long enough, you come out on top. And I think that's the side that a lot of people actually do like in trading, but they just don't live it long enough. And it's not their fault. Like most traditional upbringings do not have like probabilistic risk assessments throughout your life, right? What is it going to happen? You're asking a girl out, right? Like, again, by volume, even if you look at like Tinder, hypothetically, Tinder doesn't show you your strike rate, so to speak. If you actually saw how many people were not swiping on you, you'd be depressed, right?
Oh my God.
Whereas people are like, oh, you know, they're like, yeah, I've been swiping for 2 months. And it's like, yeah, that's a lot of no's. If I had to guess,
let's release those stats.
He's like, yeah, exactly. They're like, let's show it, right? But I would say that perspective of like kind of stacking the odds and everything you did, and the same thing I did with the engineering and all that. If you play life in a certain way, so to speak, you can get ahead of most people by just taking the right bet in the right moment.
Yeah.
But you have to understand how to analyze the bet. And that's the part that I think like where most people don't spend enough time on to actually know, like, can you calculate the bet? Which again, like in a physical scenario, if I flip a coin, you know, on a true random, you know it's 50-50. Great. If I tell you what's the I'll give you a random example, right? Is if you were to speed on a Friday night and a Tuesday night, same highway, same speed at the same time of night, all the variables are the same except for the date. And then the chance of you getting caught by a cop on a Friday is drastically higher than on a Tuesday. So if you're trying to speed and get home more efficiently or whatever, yes, the time of day matters, like all these things, and you do it on Tuesday, you probably will never get caught. Because why is it a cop just waiting at 2 a.m. on this random highway with his radar waiting? It objectively makes no sense for him. But he knows on Friday and Saturday, he's looking for DUIs and all that. So you're on the radar. So that same, every other variable is the same except the day, but the risk assessment is drastically different. And it's that perspective. Take that, apply it to almost everything you do. You build up quite an edge on everything, you know?
100%.
Yeah.
No, that's incredible. It's a really, really great analogy as well. And you know, hopefully people can take note of that. In terms of, you mentioned though about having a traditional family, you know, and then you mentioned gambling in terms of the RuneScape. And I think the RuneScape one, the League of Legends wasn't more.
No, it's just, that's just like you're playing on someone's account and just getting the higher rank, yeah.
So, what was that like then? Obviously, you know, so first of all, playing a video game for quite a long time in a traditional family, no doubt, was a bit, you probably had a little bit of friction maybe. Second of all, gambling, essentially. You know, what were the opinions and the sort of thoughts being put onto you?
So it was interesting because I grew up with my grandparents mainly, and like God bless them, they did the best they could, but they were very traditional, like off the boat type perspective. So it's like, are you sheltered? Are you homed? Are you clothed? Right? That's all that mattered. So truthfully, they have no idea what I do. Like even until now, they still don't really, and I get it, like Forex is way out of their domain in that way. So to them, and because my grandmother at the time, she just like pre everything that happened in 2020, I had my own curfews, you know, so when everything happened, that was just very normal to me. I was like, oh, like, yeah, curfew, like that's normal to me, because I had to be home by like 5 p.m., maybe 6 p.m. You know, my grandfather would take me out, but if I went to like, let's say the movie theaters for my friends, he would wait outside, and I'd feel, and he wasn't doing this in any malicious way. He just kind of solely kind of knew. So it would make me feel guilty because I'm like, I don't want to go to a movie, and you know your grandfather's just outside waiting in the car, right? I was like, I'm good. Like, so I stayed home, right? And so they never really questioned that side of things. I would say, yes, I did grow up with a Muslim background, And obviously I spent about 9 years in Egypt. So there was like, yeah, about 9 years. Yeah.
Were you born there?
I was born in Canada, and then I kind of did a back and forth thing over the time. Yeah, so I did 9 years in Egypt. And yeah, I have like strong Islamic roots from that point of view. So there was the side when you're young, there's a side of you that doesn't care. And then there's a side of you that's like, is this gambling? Is this haram? Is this all these things, right? And I did deal with a lot of Muslims, and it was interesting because the perspective did come up often, right? They're like, hey, like, how do you feel it's haram? And I asked the question, I was like, are probabilities haram, so to speak? I was like, if you're on the side of the edge and you can play it long enough, is it really haram, right? I'm not a scholar, so I'm not going to give the religious opinion on it. Yeah. But to myself, I didn't feel like that was haram because I felt like I was actually playing a system, especially as it became more of a system. At the start, yeah, sure, it was probably a lot more. No variable was controlled or whatever, but I was like, if you control this, it's an edge, right? Now, I know in Islam with Forex, right, and that's the part where I guess I kind of leaned on that opinion is, there's the Islamic accounts. So I was like, okay, that's for the rollover, which I get it. You don't want to get paid like the loan money or whatever, which I think is kind of an outdated rule now because rollover, I don't know, it's always negative now. So I feel like it's not even haram anymore because you're literally always paying rather than getting. But objectively, yes, you can opt for the Islamic accounts. So I was like, okay, so if trading then is legal in that way, then I was like, I guess this was, right? So that was the side to me where I just wasn't too bothered by it, if I'm being real honest. I never really, I was never hardcore Muslim in that way. And it was a side of like, as I said, if I was like, I think I'm playing math. I don't actually think I'm doing the side of like drugs and alcohol and gambling, risking the family's like money and whatever. I was like, no, this is controlled. And once I got past the addiction phase, that definitely didn't feel like haram anymore in that way because I was like, no, I'm literally just playing a sequence. I just have to execute on that.
Yeah, because I think there is like a line where you're gambling. Unless you're doing obviously certain risk protocols, etc., you're still gambling in the sense that you don't have an edge. But when you cross that barrier of having an edge, being disciplined towards that edge, it's not gambling anymore. Because like you say, you're just playing that system.
Well, that's what it was, yeah.
But yet, probably one of the most common questions I get, even though I don't like portray myself as like a Muslim, like really put it out there or anything like that, or discuss it too often, it's like the most common question I get is, trading's haram, is it haram, is it halal? And I just like, look, who am I? Why are you even asking me?
Yeah, I'm like, I was like, you can already see we're trading, so you're like a bit of a biased person. And that's why I said I don't want to give, like, maybe it is, and like, I hope it isn't. But there was a side I was like, I don't think I'm doing, because if you actually kind of like look at these objectively speaking, so to speak, a lot of these things like usage of alcohol and stuff, it's less to do with like the actual substance and more to do with your reaction to the substance, right? So like when you get trashed, if you are someone who's more likely to make a lot of impulsive and bad choices, it could lead to any of the myriad of things that like alcohol and drugs can lead to. And the same thing with gambling. If you can actually stop your risk assessment, I could see that too from a trading point of view where people go from an edge to gambling. And that's something I teach sometimes. I'll be like, nah, that trade was a gamble, right? I was like, I see what you were trying to do, right? But I was like, no, there was, you lost your edge and you needed to walk away, so to speak, right? And then that's the side of like that fine line. But as you become more professional about it and you know your trades and you know your edge genuinely through and through, then I don't know, just edge to me, I guess at that point. Could be wrong, of course.
No, of course, but no, I respect. I have the same sort of viewpoint as well on that, as well. So, like you mentioned that you say you were raised by your grandparents. Where were your parents with it?
My father's never been in the picture, and then my mother, like she was, but unfortunately, he kind of had a lot of issues with her in court and stuff. So there was a lot of drama from that point of view. So my mom tried to be in the picture as much as possible, but there were times just because she had to deal with court stuff in Egypt. And she thought it was safer for me to just kind of grow up in Canada. I mean, I was born there, but objectively education and everything and that, she was like, you're probably better off not dealing with this. And then when she was able to, she ended up joining. But at that point, I was kind of like a teen. So it's kind of on me now where, you're a teen and like, you don't want to listen to your mom or anything at that point, right? You're kind of a bit more secular in that way.
What was that like growing up then, like handling this very unique situation? It sounds all quite unique anyway in terms of your journey, doing the whole RuneScape.
Yeah, I mean, you do find yourself in a lot of ways, I would say, right? Because I had to kind of depend myself in ways that you don't really kind of think you have to, right? So even like growing up in Montreal, right? French is part of the language, and my grandparents being Arabic, there was no one to help you with like French homework. And you're kind of just like, oh shit, like how do I do this, right? And then even call it like social small talk. I don't think I learned about like Eminem until like late high school, right? Because look, if no one introduces it to you, right? Like how are you just going to like discover? And YouTube wasn't what it is now where you can kind of look at trending. It was just like the OG memes back then and maybe a music video. So all of a sudden someone's like, hey, did you hear like Lose Yourself? And you're like, what? And it makes you awkward in so many ways. Like I did have an extremely socially awkward phase coupled with, you're protected by your monitor, right? You're on this online business, but at the end of the day, there's no camming up. It's just all voice. You know, you have your like kind of like IG names, right? Where you could be whatever you want to be, right? You could be Riz, or you could be, I don't know, Electric Plug 72, right? And then people would actually refer to you as that. They're like, hey, Electric Plug, and you're like, oh, I guess like we're just chill with this, right? So in a way, like I never became good at like, call it like traditional masculine stuff, like being good around the house, and no one ever did it. And in a way, because my grandfather wasn't the best at that either, it was almost a bit fear-based in that way, where I wasn't like, I don't want to pick up a screwdriver and trying to figure stuff out with it, because then you would be reprimanded for it. It's like, why are you breaking this thing? You know what I mean? So in that side of life, I kind of never really touched those things. And even from like a gym point of view, I started that really late relative to peers. You know, so I remember going to CEGEP, which is like in Quebec, it's kind of like it's like a college, basically, before uni. You have to do it after high school, before uni. You have to do CEGEP, right?
Okay, yeah.
And I remember I go to first day and everyone's like objectively hot, like male and female, right? Like everyone's ripped and stuff. And I look like 7-year-old. Like I was like, dude, I've never, you know what I mean? I was like, damn. And it was a side of me that kind of just became extremely insecure in that moment. I was like, shit, like these people have obviously been working out for years to come, you know, for years that have happened. And I didn't know that, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't know you're supposed to do this. It may seem now, again, if you take how YouTube is and how social media is now, it seems obvious to do all these things. But if no one ever told it to you, you know, and I remember the first time I went to the gym, there was no like workouts online that you check on YouTube and you're like, okay, I'm going to go do this. So I actually go to the gym for the first time and I just see the machines and I'm like, okay, I'll do a bit of this guy, I'll do a bit of that guy. And I went on and, you know, I put it to a weight that just seemed comfortable because again, I don't know that I'm supposed to like target hypertrophy. I can never pronounce that word, but you know what I'm trying to say, you know, and like, yeah, exactly. Like break down a word and all those things, right? Break down the muscle, sorry. And break down the muscle and do all these things. I'm just like, I'm trying to go for convenience here. Where you're like, you know, you're like 2 sets of 10. I'm like, does that sound right? Does that sound wrong?
Yeah.
If you have no reference, you know, so you did that and I did that for like 3-4 months, no results. I probably got a bit better at endurance. And then that's about it. I didn't care about macro. I didn't eat enough. I didn't do all these things. So in a lot of the ways, I guess indirectly, it eventually made me super confident because I was always like looking at what I was doing and what it produced, right?
Okay.
And then eventually I kind of like look back and I was like, shit, okay, there's a method to this, right? If you actually observe your actions, are they producing the desired outcome at the end of, I don't know, a period of time or whatever? And if they're not, just change it. And then I guess in a way, because I have been referred to as like egotistical quite a bit, I would argue, I mean, I guess I would say I wouldn't, but I was so willing to, I'd aggressively back myself, but I'm also willing to change my opinion if you prove me wrong.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the same thing. I was like, dude, if I'm supposed to have the results, and I don't, clearly I did something wrong.
Yeah.
And that was the same thing with my trading. If my trading wasn't going well, I was like, I'm probably not as good as I think I am. Like there was a period of time where I was like, oh, you know, the market bullshit, fuck that. Fair enough. And after a while, I was like, is it though?
Yeah.
Like, you know, or is it? And I was like, yeah, no, it's me. All right, let's reverse engineer this. And it's such an exhausting process because you always kind of think you're right there. And then you don't kind of know how far off you are, right? It's not like a traditional syllabus in that way. But eventually it stacks and you're like, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
100%. 100%. And it's interesting you say that, you know, in regards to obviously not having, I know you said your grandfather was there, but he didn't really have that sort of male role, you know, that male role model, if you will, teaching you what it is to be a man in essence.
In a traditional way.
You know, and I didn't have that either. My dad passed away when I was 5 years old, you know, so I didn't have that either. And I went through a period of time, you know, in my late teens where I just kept saying to myself, I don't know what it is to be a man. No one's taught me how to shave. No one's taught me.
That was the same thing. Yeah, I picked up the first time.
Was that a similar
19,
feeling?
20, yeah, absolutely.
What was the process like for you to sort of because obviously talking to you today, you seem very sure of yourself. You know who you are. You know your strengths. You know your weaknesses. You know you accept and embrace hardship. And I think in terms of being a man, that's what it's about, really. Obviously, there's no like clear definition. But in terms of if I was to try and define it, I would say it's like someone who knows who they are, right? As you said, like backs themselves aggressively, but understands they can always learn and be better, and they might be wrong, but then willing to take on hardship, right? But when we don't know, if we're questioning ourselves because we don't have that role model, we feel lost, right, and confused, and we doubt ourselves that we can never be complete. That's how I felt. But how did you? So, what was that process like for you?
I would say it was a couple of things. I had some good friends along the way, right? Like obviously, and I remember my first like best friend in life, so to speak. His family kind of pseudo adopted me, and so in Egypt, right, I would spend like months at a time at their place. Like it was summer vacation, and I would just go to my friend's house, and I would leave in June. I'd come back like late August, right? Like, and they honestly took me into it because they understood like the situation was going, and they were telling my mom like they were like good friends with. They're like, he's an only kid, like let him play with the rest of the family, you know, and you know, like just travel with them and all that. So there was a side that I kind of saw his father and his family, and I realized I was like, okay, wait, life could be more than this, you know, and in a way. You still go through all the phases of like resentment and all that, but at some point you make it past it, right?
Yeah.
And I remember because it was also this other like story, right, where I kind of, I guess maybe from a young age I really did look at things like this. But I remember there was this girl that I liked. It was like high school, right? And I was like telling my friend, and he's like, she's way out of your league. And I remember, and I was like, and I just looked at him. I was like, I actually did not understand what he meant by that. Like I really didn't. I was like, why? Her walker's right there. We go to the same school. Like, you know, I'm not trying to ask out like Emma Watson over here or whatever, right? I was like, you know, like especially Harry Potter at the time and all that. I was like, what does he mean by that? And I get it. It was like a shot at how I looked and everything. Like eventually I understood that, right? Fast forward maybe like 7-8 years or whatever. At some point I was like, shit, like I'm relatively unhappy with how I am. I was like, okay, cool. Like what can we do? And then I made this list. It was, I guess, like an insecurity list, right? And I wrote down every single thing I didn't like about myself. And that was everything from values to perspective to physique to clothing to whatever. And some things can be fixed very quickly. So like, I don't know, fashion, you can change overnight. You can literally just go to a shop, you know, spend $1,000 or whatever, you're good, right? Something like braces, for instance, it's like 3 years and I did need braces, right? So at the time I was like, okay, cool. So I kind of put like almost like a estimated timeline and everything, funny enough. I was like, okay, braces, 3 years. And I was like, okay, we got to start this like tomorrow because this clock doesn't tick until it starts, right? I can't like do something on the side that'll speed up. I was like, gym. Oh, I don't know much about the gym actually, right? But I was like, I know I gotta eat, which I just hated eating, right? I was one of those kids that lived off like 100 calories a day, right? Wow. Like not because like we had food, I just didn't like. Yeah, I know, right? I was like, I was good with that, you know what I mean? And all those things, and then values and things like that. I was like, who am I and what do I stand for? And in a way, like I looked it up, you know, like all the values, and I read them, and it started out where you pick the ones that you think sound cool. But then I asked myself, I was like, could I actually be this person? Like, do I care about, I don't know, like something that's huge for me is loyalty, for instance. And I was like, yeah, I do. And in a way, I understood if I want it, I also have to give it. So I was like, yeah, if you're going to be loyal, like chances are you have to be loyal first, you know, and you have to do it as well. If you're going to be kind or objectively, whatever, right? You have to extend that kindness on every day. So if someone's having a bad day, maybe don't react in that way and realize, why are they doing this? Which kind of also went into perspective, as I said, is like, why are people reacting the way they do? I don't think people out there choose to be like purposely negative and mad. I think it's a byproduct to a lot of experiences, and then they kind of can't get out of it. But that stayed the same thought process. So along the way, I guess I started to like create that list. And funny enough, like bringing out the dating side of things, I remember at the time I was like, well, here's all these attractive people. It's like, why would they go out with me? You know, until I realized, wait, they have their insecurities too. You know, so then you'd have like this really attractive girl or whatever, and you'd realize she was like hyper insecure about a lot of things. And I remember this one dude, I'm sure you've kind of seen, it's like this really attractive girl with this not very attractive dude. And you're like, but how? You know, and you're like, who, like, you know, and you look, and I remember looking, and I was like, okay, like we can do something here. And I learned to kind of double down on my strengths, but also to fix the stuff that like you should have a degree of maintenance in, you know what I mean? Like I think everyone should work out to a degree and be healthy just from the health reasons, right? You don't need to be a bodybuilder or whatever. You should have a good haircut, good fashion or whatever, because these things, they represent you, you know? So that kind of became the thought process alongside with, as I said, like everything becoming edge/ROI based, and then just, I guess, following through on every decision afterwards.
100%. No, 100%. I love that. And, you know, as you say, so many people have insecurities. I think we all do at all times. You know, we always have something that will be there.
Yeah.
But I love, you know, what you did there, that exercise, you know, of writing down. You know, I've always found writing down things is very powerful, you know, and I know that's a big thing in Balkan, which we'll get onto in a moment. But, you know, one thing I did, for example, when I wanted to find a partner, you know, I always had this thing of wanting to find a partner, and I was obviously, again, reverting back to what we just talked about, I couldn't talk to girls. Even to this day, even though I'm married, if a girl, you know, speaks to me, for example, I would just be very awkward and yeah. Even to this day, honestly. I don't know what it is, but it is what it is anyway. But I remember when it came down to it, my mum told me, she said, write down in a book everything you want from a partner in detail, not just like, oh, you know, she needs to look good. In detail, eye color, hair length, you know, mannerisms, etc. So I did that. And then you just leave it. You just leave the book. You don't have to read it every day necessarily. You don't need to even think about it.
Put it out there.
Exactly, yeah. And then literally I did that, and I think within 2 months, even though me and my wife had followed each other for years,
Somehow those events.
suddenly something happened where, you know, I messaged her and this happened and that happened and there we are, we're married, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's an exercise I've done many, many times. Same with trading, same with business, same with just, you know, friendship groups. But exactly what you did, where you listed out something a bit different, where instead of listing out, you know, what you want to be, you listed out everything that you didn't like about you.
Yeah.
And then realized, okay, and then did the time scale. You know, it's almost like planning, you know, being realistic and understanding what it's going to take. I love that. I think a lot of people can take away from that for sure. So leading on from that, was there one more question I had? We talked about, one last thing.
Yeah.
And then we'll move into more of the trading side, even though a lot of things have overlapped.
Yeah.
Trading. But the last thing was in regards to looking after your grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
right? Nowadays, and I've been guilty of it, no doubt, we're very reluctant to sort of spend time with family, sacrifice things for family. You know, if anything, in the society we're living in now, family is being sort of kind of removed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of being shunned and getting rid of. But what was that like for you? You know, obviously, you know, I can imagine because they did raise you, there was definitely a level of love and respect, of course. But at the end of the day, you were a teenager. You know, at the end of the day, you had things like trading and education that you wanted to pursue, a social life, no doubt, as well. What was it like having to sacrifice that time and you know, of your own life in its essence to look after someone else?
Honestly, it was angry for a lot of it. You know, I think I felt FOMO. I think I felt like resentment. Like, in a way, I understood they were like my parents and they're like obviously they're my grandparents, but to me they were predominantly in that way. And I was like, damn, my parents are old now, right? Like I'm doing now what I would be doing at 40, for instance. I'm doing it in my late teens / early 20s.
Yeah.
And in a way, you're kind of giving up. Like Friday night, you stay home and you do that, and you're always on high alert. You know, and it's daily. It's not a 3 days a week or whatever. It's 24/7, and you're their caretaker, and you do everything from like I remember like it was honestly a bit divine in that way, where I got my license, and then like 7 days later, my grandfather had his first stroke, and in that like I effectively became the man of the house a week later. Like I had to learn about paying bills even, right? I was like, wait, how do we pay like this thing that's been around me all the time, right? I've never really considered it.
Yeah.
I was like, shit, I got to learn how to pay bills. I got to learn how to do like file taxes. I got to learn how to do groceries like properly, like which locations, whatever, car maintenance, insurances, all these things just had to, because he aggressively fell from after that, right? So in an overnight thing, I was like, you got to do this. And it felt like I grew up too fast in some ways, you know? So then all of a sudden you see your friends kind of just being reckless in a way, and you're like, I can't do that, you know? And I didn't appreciate the maturity until way later.
Of course.
Right? Because you kind of wouldn't in the moment. Like someone will tell you, they're like, Abdullah, you know, like one day this is going to, and I'm like, thank you, dude. You know, I think at a subconscious level, I believed it. Like I knew it, which has made it palatable, right? And also on the side of, I genuinely wanted to be that caretaker for them, but it didn't make it enjoyable, like being honest.
Of course.
Right? I don't want to say like I was 10 out of 10 mood all the time. No, there's a lot of times when you're dealing with elderly, and especially as they become a bit more senile, there's a lot of resistance and there's a lot of things. And they're like, versus a baby you can kind of just pick them up and put them somewhere.
Yeah.
A 240-pound man, you can't, and that doesn't want to do something, you can't just like force them on it, right? So there was a lot of that perspective. I said I learned about FOMO in that way, right? It was not like a monetary FOMO. It was like a life experience FOMO.
All time.
Of just like, dude, I'm here all day. My life is yours, and like this is a bit messed up to say, but it's like, but for how long, right? Like when I looked at him, I was like, how long are you gonna be able? And it's like I didn't want to wish death on him. That wasn't it. Yeah. But there was a side of like, I can't walk away from this. Like there was no reality that I'm like, okay, I'm getting married tomorrow. Good luck and goodbye.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that was me now, right? And my mother helped as much as possible. We were so into it together that it was the side of like, yes, I guess eventually I could have walked away and left my mother, but her being like single as well, there was that I was like, it's not a life. Like it's a full-time caretaker. It gets to your mental health, you know, because, and unfortunately my grandparents are a bit more on the negative side. So they're almost like wishing for death with it. And it makes you, who's trying to revive them, like it's like trying to help someone who's telling you, dude, leave me die the whole time. And you're like dragging them and you're like, I could leave you and you will die. And they're like, will die. And they're like, yeah, do it. And you're like, I can't do that because it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
So you're fighting that mentality and it drains a loop. I was like, I literally feel like I'm living the same day over and over and over.
Yeah.
So then I kind of turned it into a game and I was like, well, if hypothetically I am in a loop, the loop has to break at some point.
Yeah.
So
that, hey, this person here did this, and they might be able to learn from it. And especially if it's someone who hasn't got it as hard, they'll be able to say, if he's done it and he's gone through all this, I have no excuses.
Yeah.
Hopefully it has that self-accountability. But by the sounds of it, and listening to obviously what you said there, it comes down to, having that self-awareness to understand what you're going through, understanding as well and accepting what you're going through, and there's no changing that, and then making the most of it, and willing. But I think the biggest thing you said there was that it's going to shape you. If you allow it and you use it in the correct manner, you're going to be able to come out of it in a 10 times better position than probably other people who might have all the free time but might be wasting it.
Well, I think it's that, like, in a way, right, and almost like even though your grandparents are gonna die, seeing it in real time. Like, I remember I had actually my grandfather. I'd come home from CrossFit, and he was in the kitchen. I saw him, and I like waved at him. Whatever. I grabbed, I think, protein shake, which is funny because I'm allergic to protein, and I didn't know this yet. Right? Like, I'm allergic to whey or whatever. And then I go upstairs, and for whatever reason, I come back down, and I just see his face is like drooped, and I was like. And the stroke, right? You've heard the things and whatever. And again, being like a traditional Muslim family, you don't talk about negative stuff. I mean, funny enough, because they talk about all the negative stuff, but you don't like say certain things because they believe it's gonna like almost like insta manifest.
Yeah.
And I look at my grandmother and I was like, Grandpa's having a stroke. And she's like, oh, you don't say that. I was like, no, he's having a stroke. This is not like what I was like, I'm gonna call 911. We're gonna like do all this. And in that moment, you saw this person who was fully functional the day before, like he was out gardening the day before,